You guys may have seen this post. It originated kind of from the National Post, but it got some pretty broad coverage. Montreal man, 39, dies from aneurysm after giving up on 6-hour wait at the ER. The reactionaries are out in full force. And as we can observe, Canada is very much on the brink of a serious swing to the right, thanks in no small part to Trudeau's Liberal government not delivering for Canadians, not speaking to their material conditions, as is the case with all neoliberal capitalist governance, really. And you're seeing a lot of reactionaries pushing this story as some kind of, well, let's be real. We all know what's behind it. Behind it is we want to privatize the socialized healthcare system because the socialized healthcare system isn't working. That's almost always what's behind it. And you can see from nothing but the quote tweets, Canadian news has picked up Adam's story. It's surreal and angering and sad to see him as the literal face of our failed healthcare system. Universal healthcare, see? First of all, he was a Zionist, so I don't even care. Second of all, that's not what happened. We'll get into that because that isn't what happened. And we do have some people clapping back. In America, at my emergency, it is often a 6-hour wait. This is not unique to free healthcare, LMAO. But you have plenty, and of course it's an Israel and an American flag. You have plenty of reactionary accounts that are pushing, this is the level of care they want us to have in the US. You have plenty of reactionary accounts across the board, whether it's American reactionary accounts or Canadian reactionary accounts. They're trying to promote Canada as some kind of failed healthcare system. And there's two angles they're trying to do. In the States, especially in the wake of the recent events with the clapped healthcare CEO, thanks to our Lord and Savior, Luigi, they're trying to demonize socialized medicine because the CEO's assassination has created a massive discourse over the failure of the American healthcare system. But we also have a very aggressive and concerted push while the conservative Pierre Poilievre government is looming over the horizon. You're seeing a conservative push to kind of manufacture consent for maybe privatizing Canadian healthcare, giving all sorts of wild hot takes as to how our system has failed us because of a 6-hour wait at the emergency room that this guy had. Now, right off the bat, you might want to ask yourself, why didn't he just not give up? And, well, that's a good call. Because, you shouldn't just fucking go home. That's kind of stupid. Doesn't really make a lot of sense. At all. But furthermore, as this is an argument that affects both Canada and America, I want to make this as crystal clear as possible using actual, I don't know, facts and information, as opposed to these unbelievably dishonest propaganda tactics where they frame Canada and its healthcare system as some kind of exceptional failure. especially in comparison to America. And you see a lot of reactionaries pushing this very hard. Why are they pushing it really hard? Well, because they want to keep the American healthcare system as for-profit, and B, they want to privatize it up here. But the reality is, despite how sensationalized this story became very quickly on social media, we're going to come back to reality here. And for reference, you can just Google this comparison of healthcare systems in Canada and the United States. They got receipts for everything. I'm just going to go to the relevant little bits here. As reported by the Health Council of Canada, a 2010 Commonwealth survey found that 39% of Canadians waited 2 hours or more in the emergency room versus 31% in the US. 43% waited 4 weeks or more to see a specialist versus 10% in the US. The same survey states that 37% of Canadians say it is difficult to access care after hours, evening, weekends, or holidays without going to the emergency department, compared to 34% of Americans. Furthermore, 47% of Americans and 47% of Canadians and 50% of Americans who visited emergency departments over the past 2 years feel like they could have been treated at their normal place of care if they were able to get an appointment. So what does this mean? Essentially what it means is the wait times are pretty friggin' similar. And there's a lot of evidence to support this. But again, there's a massive propaganda push to try and demonize any sort of socialized medicine. And I'll be the first one to say, guys, I'll be the first one to say that there are problems, like there are things we can improve with Canada's healthcare system. Absolutely. I'm not one of these people sitting there saying it's perfect. You're not going to see me give that take. But for comparable results, I'd say having a system where you don't go into crippling debt or have to fight with health insurance companies just to get a claim approved, that's a pretty good deal. And furthermore, I'd just like to point out as well, for a so-called country that has such a comparatively worse system, Canada is 20th in life expectancy at 82.63 years. Damn, I gotta scroll down, y'all. I had to have missed it. USA, 79.30. So that's 55th place versus 20th place. So, I mean, like, what are we doing here? And furthermore, I've had actual people, Americans, weigh in on this. Friend of the show, Comrade Leah, I had to wait 3 months to even see a doctor, and people I know who have undergone cancer treatments had to wait or travel halfway across the country to not wait as long. It's a bullshit argument altogether. And furthermore, even I myself, I have plenty of friends in America. I have family members who live in America. They report across the board pretty much similar wait times, both for a specialist and for in the ER. Hold on, still processing. I waited 9 months to get an appointment for some lady problems here in the US and another 6 months for a colonoscopy. Fortunate to have amazing insurance with only a 10% copay. So, as you can see, there's really not too much of a difference here. But again, you would never know that. You would never know that if you just listened to the reactionary right-wing propaganda sphere that is present all over social media, over the corporate press, all across the board. You would never know that if you just took these people at face value and took their arguments at face value. Especially when they isolate one specific incident. But there's even more to this story that makes it bunk. So this is from Kashif Pirzada. This was the guy's original post here. Had a bit of a health scare last night, but thankfully it wasn't a heart attack. Not sure what it was though, because once they made sure I wasn't dying, I was thrown out into the waiting room, and 6 hours later I said fuck it and went home. Now again, they're trying to make it seem, and I've seen a lot of accounts online make it seem like the ER threw him out. He didn't. He wasn't thrown out. What happened was they had him wait in the waiting room because they determined that it wasn't completely emergent. And then he went home. Canadian healthcare, folks, best in the world. Well, I mean, given that you don't have to pay tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars to access, basic fucking medical care, I'd say it's pretty good. There are better systems out there. I think the NHS is better. I think a lot of the Nordic countries' models are better. I think in a lot of areas, China's is getting up there too. Of course, he posted a selfie because he wanted an excuse to show off his chest. But this MD kind of breaks this down and kind of dispels the incredibly dishonest framing around this unfortunate event. There's a lot of bluster about the inadequacies of the Canadian health system about this unfortunate man who died of an aortic dissection. The truth is, this is one of the hardest things to diagnose in the ER and is something that is easily missed. I'll tell you why. Chest pain is probably the most common complaint that we see in the emergency department. Abdominal pain is the second most common complaint. We take it very seriously, and every patient usually gets an ECG, blood work including troponin levels. This measures levels of heart muscle protein that leaks into the blood if there's heart damage, sign of a heart attack. Chest x-ray to look for any chest abnormalities, pneumonia, pneumothorax, etc. We also monitor repeat ECGs and the troponin levels to establish that things are improving. If all of these tests are negative, the chest pain is resolved, the patient's story is not too concerning, and there's no serious physical findings, we will usually discharge with a rapid follow-up to see a cardiologist for additional testing, usually within days. How can we possibly miss such a devastating diagnosis as an aortic dissection? Because it can show up with all kinds of symptoms. It can be painless. It can mimic acid reflux or a simple back strain. One colleague recently had one elderly patient with stomach flu symptoms of nausea and vomiting, and the only thing that tipped him off was that family members were massaging her back, prompting a CT that discovered the aneurysm. If she went home with some nausea pills, she would have died in her sleep. And as you can see, it's known as one of the great imitators. Much like Lyme disease, lupus. If you've ever seen House, that's a popular one on that show. So again, this isn't an easy diagnosis to make. It is often missed. There's no consistent blood test or physical exam finding that will discover a dissection. There are classic things we look for, like chest pains with neurological symptoms, numbness or weakness in a limb, or chest pain and abdominal pain at the same time, or the textbook tearing pain that radiates to your back. Patients with a history of Marfan's or other connective tissue disease are at a high risk, as are people with bicuspid aortic valves. SARS-2, COVID, is known to cause endothelial inflammation and is a likely risk factor, and I've seen a case that developed during the acute phase of the infection. The gods need to smile on you to catch some cases. Those I caught looked like death, and it was obvious something was happening even when the usual tests were normal. But that's not always the case. Colleagues have picked it up because they were sweating too much, or the heart rate was a little high, or I just had a feeling something was off. If you're rushed or harried, or the ED is overflowing, I can imagine not having the time to pay attention to catch the subtle things. How do we diagnose it? A CT scan of the chest with contrast, so that's the dye they inject in your veins so that you can make things out as clearly as possible on the imaging, is the gold standard. Is it practical to CT scan hundreds of people a day to catch possible dissections? Absolutely not. Each CT chest is 5 to 6 MSV of radiation, roughly 3 times your yearly background radiation exposure. Each scan contributes slightly to an increased future cancer risk, and the harm done would have likely vastly exceed the benefit. To critics who think this is a system issue, we don't have to get prior authorization from insurers to do these tests, and it is widely available in most ERs in Canada. Getting the right CT scan protocol also matters. I had one gravely ill patient where we gave contrast according to the protocol to find pulmonary embolisms, and it was negative. The patient was white as a ghost, had a crashing blood pressure, and looked like death. We had to repeat the scan and time the contrast to look for a dissection, and it was positive. He went to the OR and survived. Bottom line, this is a terrible disease, and catching it is often as much a matter of luck as it is medical skill. Keep yourself healthy, and God forbid you need to come to the ED for your chest pain. We will do our best. So, that is kind of the meat and potatoes of this issue. Because you may have seen this, if you're Canadian, you almost certainly saw this floating around social media. This horror story of a man who waited an ungodly amount of time to see any kind of emergency service, and then he was thrown out and then he died after. What a scary tragedy. We better privatize the healthcare system. This is why I encourage people, guys, look into these stories. Go digging beneath the surface. And if it's something like Twitter, usually something so much as like a quote tweet or like a highly liked comment under the propaganda post is usually a good indicator that you at least have to maybe look a little further than just taking these things at face value. Because there is nothing that would make conservatives happier. Nothing on this planet. There is nothing that would make Canadian conservatives happier than turning Canada into America 2.0. Why do you think they're all dancing and hollering and cheering for the idea that Canada get annexed and God Daddy Trump swoop in and rescue Canada from the terrible Trudeau government? Now I'll agree that the Trudeau government is indeed terrible. I'll be the first one to say that. I've been criticizing Trudeau's government for years. The only difference is it's from the left, because I don't think neoliberal capitalism is ever going to speak to the material conditions of the working class, and neither should you. But I digress. My main point here is simple. Up here in Canada, you get comparative results to America when it comes to wait times, when it comes to care. The only difference is we have a socialized system. So we pay for that in our taxes. It's not free, as a lot of people misunderstand it to be. But, you know, I think that's a pretty good deal. I think not going into crippling medical debt, going bankrupt, or dying because a claim was denied, I think that's a pretty good deal for comparative results. I think it's pretty good. Also, not for nothing, but let's dig back into this guy. This doesn't really matter, but I just want to show you guys the kind of person who's Canadian, and oh God, look at all these terrible takes. Who's Canadian and shits on our healthcare system. Look at this shit. The American system would in fact be a major improvement, even if still not a great option. They're literally trying to push the dog shit American healthcare system up here. They're trying to push it. And we'll see garbage takes like this. It's not so much our healthcare system that is failing. It is failing under the weight of an overload of Trudeau's 14% increase in our population due to an abhorrent migrant policy. So again, this is just brain dead. Like, they're just kind of riffing off the dome here. Bratney, this is another one of the Canadian like conservative propaganda accounts. I'm convinced these accounts are like paid, kind of the same way like IDF accounts or like the NAFO dogs are. It's kind of around the same. It's kind of around the same sort of. Shtick. Brandon Bedford. I lived in Canada for the first 30 years of my life. Moved to Korea, got a full health checkup, and they found a tumor, asymptomatic, surgery this week. It scares me to wonder if it would have ever been found in Canada. It would have. But again, look at all this. It's all the same NPC talking points. Immigration. I mean, like, holy shit, these people aren't even trying. They're just recycling reactionary American propaganda and just, like, passing it off up here. Sure, capitalism isn't the problem. It's immigrants. Blame immigrants for all of your problems. And you'll just see, if not something like the American system, then what? Healthcare should be a 100% of free market service. See, like, look at all this.